The Bible is true in so many ways. Particularly this Sunday, we see that the truth about its refusal to censor out all the sort of feelings of disillusionment that we can have, or the state of disillusionment that we can get ourselves into when we have the wrong perspective. And so it talks about this. It's from Ecclesiastes, from the Old Testament wisdom literature. It speaks to us about a man or a woman, an old person, young person, whoever it may happen to be, who's very wise and very skillful and very successful in their life and in their work, and yet they have feelings of disillusionment. What is all this about? It's a fabulous first reading, and it ties in obviously to the gospel reading with somebody just simply pursuing their life of work just for the gaining and the amassing of wealth. And what does all that mean? Well, it doesn't mean too much at all. It means something, I suppose, but in the end, it doesn't mean too much when one gets to the end of one's life. And so I rather like this quality about the Bible. It's true to form, particularly with our human experiences. And of course, our life is tremendously purposeful and intentional. We do have feelings of disillusionment. And so to help us through these periods of disillusionment and sort of monotony in a way, along comes a great figure in the life of the church last century, St. John Paul II, and writes an encyclical on the meaning of work. So it was commemorating 90 years after the publication of the very first modern social encyclical by Pope Leo XIII. And he writes this as an anniversary, the 90th anniversary, and he focuses solely on the meaning of human work. And what he says, I think, is most important for us when we go through these experiences of disillusionment and monotony. So he says, well, firstly, work transforms the exterior world, whatever we may be working on, and that's important. And that's a very good thing as we look back at our work and see what's happened at the day's work at the end of the week. We look back and see what has been transformed, and much has been transformed, even if it's the most monotonous of things. Secondly, he says, well, not only is the exterior world being transformed, but we ourselves are being transformed from inside out by the fact that we are changing as we work and as we do our work, particularly if we do our work with a certain sense of perfection and pride, with the right intention, then we become people of great character. We begin to develop these different virtues in our work. And most importantly too, the Pope says that the place of work, all of our places of work, can become places of communion. And if we stop and reflect on that, it's profoundly true that suddenly we're put side by side with somebody and we start to develop a friendship that we had never had and that endures way beyond our work lives. So most important points there. So work is transforming the exterior world. It transforms us inwardly, and it transforms our workplace into places of communion. A most important point, I think. Towards the back end, and I'll finish with this, towards the back end of that encyclical called Laborem Exercens, that is exercising human work, he talks about the spirituality of work. Most important. Yes, most important, spirituality of work. And what he does there, he focuses on the creative act of God. He goes back to the book of Genesis and says, well, look, in God's creative work, God's creative act, there are 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. And the day of rest enables God to look back at his work and see that it's all very good, particularly when it comes to the creation of the human being. God found that it was very good. Most important, emphatic statement from God. And so our work, because we're made in God's image and likeness, our work has this quality too, that it should have a rhythm of working and then of resting. The resting helps us to pause, to stop, and then to look back at our work and in a sense internalize our work. And so it becomes an offering to God. And we see, most importantly, we see the providence, we see the hand of God in our work that we didn't see if we didn't stop and look back at it. This is a great thing. In the tradition, as the tradition developed, we got people like St. Ignatius of Loyola giving us the examination of consciousness, which is just that. It's looking at the day's events and looking back at them and seeing the moments of desolation, disillusionment, and the moments of consolation. And the consolation comes when we realise that both in the moments of disillusionment and the times of joy, we can see the hand of God right throughout the day. If we just take a few minutes to pause and stop and look back, it only takes a few minutes, And so we try and do that each day, but we also try and do it each week. So in other words, the resting fulfills the work. It finishes the work. We haven't completed our work like God until we stop and look back at our work. And so therefore, our work becomes worship. It becomes united in an act of love and an act of offering of ourselves to God and for others.